Roma Shah, and I go by she, her. I'm a program coordinator with the Arrive Center, and I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Nadia Swanson, who will be presenting on using a harm reduction approach with LGBTQI plus youth experiencing homelessness and survival sex. Welcome, Nadia.
Hello, thank you so much, Roma. And thank you to the whole team for inviting me and having this wonderful conference. So huge room, 300 going up, 386. So there's a lot of people to build community with today. So I'm so honored to meet you all and hopefully get to hear some of your voices throughout this time, at least through the chat or with some questions as we move through this material. I'm going to sort of plan to just speak for a little bit due to the size of the room, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. But if anything comes up while I'm talking, feel free to throw it in the chat. And if it's necessary, the moderators can stop me and we can address it as we go forward. I don't know if I see in the chat that someone's hearing an echo. I don't know. I don't hear it. I don't know if other people are hearing it as well. Okay. Sometimes sometimes leaving and coming back can help resolve some of those issues if you hear an echo on your end. Awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna get started since we only have an hour together. Actually, first, before I jump fully in, if anyone is open, if you can throw in the chat sort of what, if you have any connection to the work of supporting LGBTQ youth, sex work, survival sex, is anyone direct service workers out here, educators, students, who we got in the room? Feel free to throw it in the chat. Students, MSW students, education students, direct service with this population we'll be talking about, great. Right. Legal, paralegal folks, sex educators, youth advocates. Awesome. All right, so we got sounds like a really nice mix of folks in the field, folks learning, educators. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so like Roma said, we're going to talk about using a harm reduction approach for LGBTQIA plus youth experiencing homelessness and who are engaging in survival sex and sex work. I'm going to start off by, we're going to watch a short video to bring in some of the voices of the young people that we serve at the Forney Center. For those who aren't familiar, the Forney Center is the first in the nation, formed in 2002 to serve LGBTQ homeless youth, and we've grown since then to become the nation's largest program serving LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. We're based in New York City, and we serve just about over 2,000 youth a year in a combination of 24-hour drop-in center that's always open. COVID had it shut down for a little while, but then we also have emergency and transitional and transgender specific housing programs for our young people, and then helping them get into more long-term stable housing. So we're going to hear some of the voices and experiences of some of the young people that that I've worked with in the past in this video. Let me just make sure, share my sound.
Your dry skin story changes from one day to the next. Try Eucerin Advanced Repair and Switch. It doubles your skin's moisture and repairs dry skin over time. So tomorrow can be a different story. Eucerin, recommended and used by dermatologists.
When I was younger and closeted and terrified, I don't know if I necessarily had a figure that I could really look up to and identify with. I'm Troy Sivan, and I am a musician from Australia.
few stereotypes that people have about like homelessness is that like we ride the train, we don't do anything with our lives, we're all stupid, we're all ugly. Like, bitch, no. Look at me. I'm homeless and I'm amazing. Just imagine you being like 19 or even 21 and 30 degrees outside and you're outside in the cold sleeping on the train. Like, that doesn't happen to everyone.
I decided to leave for, to be free and be able to fully express who I was. My house was not a safe place for that.
Exploiting yourself just to have somewhere to stay. And some people end up being HIV positive, ending up in domestic violence, or like being pregnant and being homeless. I'm an advocate for LGBTQ homeless youths.
Compared to these kids who are like my age and you're now using life as a platform to help others, it's like, it's the coolest thing in the world to me. I'm at the Ali Forney Center in New York City to come and meet with some inspiring LGBT homeless youth. So yeah, do you guys mind giving me a little tour of the place?
Yeah, sure.
Well, you want to start back here, like the art room? Sure.
Yeah.
As a community, we've come so far, but we clearly have a very, very, very long way to go. Now it's my job and our job to kind of keep pushing that forward and keep moving things in the right direction. Hey, what's up? This is Troy Sivan, and I'm at the Ali Forney Center in New York. So, Nicole, what is the Ali Forney Center?
The Ali Forney Center is a housing and social service organization for 16 to 24-year-olds who identify as LGBTQ and are experiencing homelessness or unstable housing.
So I guess I wanted to start first. Can everyone just tell me a little bit about who they are and what life was like before the Ali Forney Center?
And life before Ali Forney Center was a little bit gloomy because I was in a stuck situation.
Main reason why I came here in the first place because it's domestic violence. Like, I lost my mother. She keeps me strong. She's the reason why I am the person I am today. And my father didn't raise me to be weak. Like, I've always been a fighter.
It has been like a roller coaster ride. I'm a Jamaican gay black man. Jamaica has nothing like this. Just imagine a life being like LGBT and not having a shelter and being homeless and being discriminated from your family and friends.
What are some misconceptions that you guys would say the world has about the homeless population?
Then it's a lot harder for you to find places that are suitable for you being LGBT and feel safe. I think also homelessness doesn't discriminate. I mean, it can happen to anyone.
There's also many layers that people don't really know about. Criminalization is tied, and I don't think poverty should be criminalized.
What are some nuances that you would say are specific to being LGBTQ and homeless?
A lot of times people say, well, there's a lot of help, but when you try to access that help, there's always that bureaucratic tie to you. You're like, now I can't access this because I don't have an ID.
The services that are available in the city are not available elsewhere.
And then we should probably bring in the conversation around like access and privilege, because I've met a lot of Black and brown youth whose parents love them and accept them, but who cannot provide.
Unfortunately, homelessness and sex work seem to go often hand in hand.
It becomes a bad practice. It becomes a bad habit.
You try to get a job, but you can't because of your identity. That unfortunately pushes you to have to use whatever resource you have. And a lot of times that's your body. And a lot of times people feel so disconnected from their body that it's like, okay, it's okay for me to do this at this point.
How can people like myself or people watching this video help make a difference for LGBTQ homeless youth?
More allies, the better. And more youth voices, the better also.
I think the thing that never ceases to inspire me and amaze me is young queer people and the fight that they just, I think, innately have in them.
My biggest dream, though idealistic, is to ultimately end youth homelessness.
My biggest dream for myself is to hopefully one day have a community space where I am engaging and empowering and educating the community.
I'm really happy these days. A lot has been happening for me, and so many opportunities have been coming my way, and internships and jobs and things like that, and being able to go out there and advocate for my community.
I think taking an active role right now is more important than ever. If you can help out, help out.
So I hope that helped give you a little bit of an insight into what the youth are experiencing and how they think and feel about the violence that happens, not only as someone who holds an LGBTQ identity, but also with the trauma and the hecticness and chaoticness that comes with experiencing homelessness, and what survival can look like. At the Ali Forney Center and other LGBTQ groups I work at, like Callum Lord Community Health Center, we see sex work as work. And we differentiate between survival sex work, and trafficking. That those are three things under a large umbrella. So to provide some context for what I mean by that, is that survival sex we define as having traded sex for food, money, a place to stay, any sort of need, cell phone, whatever. And you're trading it for the reason of survival, right? That it's not a enthusiastically consent-based type of survival sex, that you're doing it to gain something because you need it in order to survive. This is where if you're under 18, if you engage in any type of survival sex, that's when it legally is included under the definition of trafficking. But we differentiate that in how we support young people, right? So that can be very useful when folks might need legal support, that they can get a lot of different benefits and different legal supports if they are engaging in survival sex to help them gain more stability. But generally, if someone under 18 is engaging in survival sex, we see it as that, because how the young person defines it for themselves is how we need to center that experience and use the language that they use back on them and just provide harm reduction to increase safety around their situation. Sex work is trading sex for money, drugs, or places to stay, or any good by choice without any force, fraud, or coercion. Key phrases, that's what definition of trafficking consists of: force, fraud, or coercion. And so it's any type of sex work that people are enthusiastically doing, and they're doing it on their own. Sex work is the term the community continuously uses for themselves as to acknowledge self-determination, social justice, and in the fight to decriminalize sex work and seeing that sex work is work. Prostitution is still the word that is used in the law, but is an outdated term as far as community and when we are speaking about folks who engage in sex work. There's some really exciting things that have been happening in New York recently around the push to decriminalize sex work. One is the Walking Well Trans bill, which is what it is sort of called informally, was repealed just in February. This was a decade-long fight from advocates to repeal this bill where loitering for the purposes of prostitution is what the legal jargon is, right? And so we know that the people who are most disproportionately affected by that law, the antiquated law, it's disproportionately trans folks, Black and brown folks, and young people, and is not actually providing any support services or addressing why someone might be engaging in sex work. And it's also scooping up lots of people just based off of their identity, assuming that they're engaging in sex work when they're not. Think back to the bill where cops used to be able to use condoms as evidence, where that was taken away. So this is sort of an extension of that and building on that. And then in January of this year, and in April of this year, the Manhattan DA and the Brooklyn DA announced that they would no longer prosecute prostitution. And so that was a huge step in the work towards full decriminalization of sex work. Then we also need to bring in the huge fight around sustainable and supportive housing for folks, especially young people, that housing is a human right, and when we're reducing this harm. I want to provide some stats of some of the experiences that LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness are experiencing in comparison to non-LGBTQ youth who are experiencing homelessness. This is taken from Chapin Hall, which is out of the University of Chicago. They're doing sort of the largest and broadest research about youth homelessness in our country. And so you can see here that there is a very large difference between an LGBTQ young person and a non-LGBTQ young person's experience with homelessness. Just based off right off the bat with the topic of today, exchanging sex for basic needs, 27% are LGBTQ and 9% are non-LGBTQ. And of course, with all statistics, we can always assume they're a little bit low based off of reporting comfortability of the participants and also who they're accessing. And so you can see lots of different types of violence that young people are experiencing at a disproportionate rate for LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness, from exposure to discrimination to getting physical harm and forced sex and harm to self. And so that's why this work is so important, that we center the LGBTQ youth who are experiencing homelessness most to provide this trauma-informed care and harm reduction around their experiences. Okay. So some additional statistics to offers out of this research from Meredith Dank from the Urban Institute called Surviving the Streets. And what they're finding is found in 2015 was 87% of the youth identified of LGBTQ or questioning. And remind you, this was all taken in New York City, their research. And that 6 out of the 10 of the youth who are street homeless were engaging in sex work due to housing instability and how it greatly exacerbates their risk for sex trafficking. Dank goes on to compare past research from 2007 and 2008 that was showing that most of the commercially sexually exploited youth were young women, is what was finding. But what Meredith Dank and her team actually found is that the majority of the youth experiencing homelessness were young cis men at 54%. And so we have to make sure we're keeping that in the forefront of our mind when the broader narrative around sex work, around survival sex, around trafficking is not the image of young cis gay men. And so it's important to make sure that when we're creating programs, we're engaging with young people, that we are having these conversations with all folks who might be at high risk, regardless of identity. Because if we're only focusing on generally cis girls, white cis girls, as the media likes to portray, we're going to miss a large group of people who are engaged in survival sex. So next I want to share a few quotes to bring some more voices into the room. The next 4 quotes I'm going to read to you are taken from the Persist Health Project, which was done about 5 or 6 years ago. A group of sex workers, folks who engage in survival sex, did some qualitative research around sex work and survival sex participants' experiences with care, right? So if they're going to engage in any sort of service, whether that just be going to their regular primary care physician, to any sort of LGBTQ specific services or mental health services, what their experiences have been around their experiences of having engaged in any sort of survival sex or sex work. So, and I think it's most important that this research was done by folks of lived experience. The first quote is, having that kind of longitudinal relationship would be nice. Someone you could actually talk openly about, not just sex work, but drug use or multiple partner involvement, or just being queer in general. Basically to have someone respect what I said that I needed, obviously listen to my symptoms and they have the expertise in some way, but to then know that because of my resources, they meet me halfway. Another quote says, I've always respected providers who are open to different opinions, but too often you get a provider that what they say is the law or the final word, and they're not open to alternative treatments or alternative ways of dealing with a problem. So I really like someone who's open to the ideas in their practice. It's really your body and your instrument. And whether or not you're using it for sex work or not, it doesn't matter. I think just being really open to whatever your patient is bringing you and hopefully being able to answer questions. And if you don't have answers, kind of pushing you in a direction that might. So I guess having the well-rounded wellness. Next one's on about disclosure. It's an important piece of information. It gives them some context to what you're coming in with, and to not be able to say that, you know, it's not that it's going to negatively affect your care. You're still going to get the testing, but there's a little piece of you that's missing. You know, when they ask, why do you have anxiety? Why do you have depression? Well, I'm in the sex trade, and not a lot of people are going to get that. And I don't know where to go to explain this. And lastly, I came out as a sex worker, my last place, and I checked the box. I wanted to see what would happen. Like, I traded sex for money, drugs, or whatever. And then afterwards, I was pulled into, while I was waiting for the test results, they pulled me into the side room with a counselor of some sort. I had this woman who was just so concerned. It finally got to a point where it was clear that I didn't want to have this conversation with her. So then I was taken down to another room in the basement, and I was waiting for someone to come to that room. And this white woman comes in, and it's a professional counselor, and she has nothing to do with healthcare, connecting people to services. And she starts asking me questions. So what are you doing? So let's set up some time for you to come in for counseling. And then I left. But that was the last time I went to that clinic in New York. So you can hear from what these folks are saying that being open-minded, not shaming folks, blaming folks, that they're not seeing sex work and survival sex as a valid choice, and seeing it as something that we need to save this person from, that we need to get them out of this. And that's not always the answer. It's not always what everyone wants. And it's not respecting the autonomy and the experience of the person in front of you. So that will come more and more into play as we go. So I'm gonna check in with the chat. I see a few things coming in. Yeah. So on this, about sex workers don't need saving, right? So this is still from Persist's recommendations after doing their research. There's a temptation to want to rescue sex workers or people engaging in survival sex from their circumstances. And so while some people might be experiencing trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion, they might need assistance escaping their circumstance. But someone engaging in the sex trade can have a great deal of autonomy, can love what they do, can be totally also fine with maybe engaging in it in a survival way, and aren't wanting to be rescued. What's more supportive is helping them maybe around survival sex, is giving them some of the resources that they might be engaging in survival sex for, right? So they're no longer needing to use sex as a survival skill. And if they want to continue to engage in sex work for their own employment and money, then that is a choice, but they're not feeling forced to have to engage in survival sex to get their basic needs met, right? And we can provide them housing, we can provide them goods, we can connect them with resources for other work, other toiletries, ways to get a free phone, all of those types of things. Folks want to be respected and supported as they gain access to appropriate services, like healthcare and employment protections. And Persist goes on in that research to say, well, it can be difficult to watch someone struggle in a painful relationship or try to manage out of control sexual behavior. You must honor the dignity of each person and trust their process when it doesn't pose an immediate threat to them or others. Key phrase, immediate threat to them or others. So some ideal providers and models of care. The participants spoke of an ideal provider as someone who's open-minded, respectful, a good listener. Participants emphasize the importance of having a provider who's affirming and not judgmental, not only about their sexual behavior, but about sex work in general. And that we're not asking questions that we don't need to know. So if your job is just to do the intake, we don't necessarily need to know all the other information. That's something that their provider can have that conversation with them as they go forward. If we're not there to provide medical care, we don't necessarily need to know everything, right? So just asking yourself, do I need to know this, or am I just curious? It's okay to be curious, but we have to make sure we hold that boundary so we're respecting other folks and their privacy and their right to self-determination. So getting into some specific harm reduction dialogue now that we've set the stage a little bit. We want to make sure that we're using a harm reduction model. What harm reduction does is it reduces negative consequences, understand what benefits the person is getting from the behavior or the act. It respects self-determination and agency. It understands that these issues are complex, they're nuanced and part of a real reality. And just stopping doesn't necessarily solve the problem at hand. It centers the agency of those impacted individually and promotes safety. And it focuses on a person's strengths. My favorite harm reduction quote is this: that harm reduction meets people where they're at, but doesn't leave them there. And it's really, really important to remember, and this is especially hard with younger folks, is that there's a reason that someone is engaging in survival sex work, and we need to affirm that and help them get their needs met in another way when they're ready, even if they are minors. Even if we meet them with shame, blame, or punishment, they're still going to need to survive. They're just not going to come to you anymore to talk about safety and to find a safe environment in their school, in your program, in the community overall. So we want to support folks in understanding when they're ready, that if they are wanting to minimize their reliance on sex work or survival sex, or reduce or get to a place where they're not doing it at all, that we're meeting them where they're at with that, and understanding that it's also not linear, that they might need it at certain times, go back, not do it, that all of this is not going to be a cut and dry thing, and we're going along the ride with them, and providing them safer ways to find dates, to getting them connected to PrEP and PEP, regular STI testing, as well as other job training or education resources to reduce the reliance on engaging in sex work. And also thinking about how we can transfer those skills, right? Lots of people might feel like they're like, well, I've just been doing survival sex, I've never had a job that's not that, so how can I get a job anywhere else? Well, if you're engaging in sex work, you have to manage your own finances. You have to de-escalate situations. You definitely have very good people skills. And those are all things that we can use as transferable skills to help them maybe find other work if that's what they're wanting to do. So thinking about creating some safety plans, completing safety plans regardless of any active safety concerns, acknowledging that for LGBTQ, safety is an ongoing issue. So you can create a safety plan about anything that the young person might be experiencing that might be putting them at risk or causing harm to their lives, emotionally, physically, all of those things. You want to treat it as a living document, so it can change, we can modify it, and we're also going to make it together. This isn't something that I'm creating and putting on them. It's a collaborative effort. And they can actually have it on a piece of paper and carry it with them around, so that they have certain phone numbers, a physical visual reminder of when this happens, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to call, can be really, really useful in those high stress situations that might be the most risky. We want to focus on how the individual understands and defines their own safety needs, right? So it's client specific, it's self-determination, identifying potential areas of danger, so people, places, situations. I'm more likely to have unprotected sex work when I'm high. So we can understand that risk. So let's identify that and think about, okay, so we're not going to not do sex work because you need that for your income, but how would it feel to do it that high and get high later, right? And so we want to think about harm reduction and slowly moving that needle until maybe they're in a place where they might be ready to reduce their amount of substances or other aspects, but keeping them safe and moving that line as we move forward. outlining prevention and intervention techniques, potential safety concerns specific to the community. So we want to make sure we're thinking about race. We want to think about gender. We need to think about ability, and how folks with different intersecting identities are going to be more at risk, depending on what those identities are, depending where they are, who they're engaging with, and addressing all of those factors with the person you're working with. Understanding the right as victims and giving available resources. So different resources in the area, different violence prevention programs that you all are aware of and run, that folks can be engaged with. You want to provide them with those outreach numbers, with those folks. If you know where different outreach vans are hanging out in your city, in your town, letting them know that on Thursday nights, that van is always at the spot, right? So they know that they can go there if they need any sort of support or a condom, anything that they would need. And how to report crime if they would like to do that. And we want to be support to them about what that looks like and what's going to come of being engaged with the police. As we all know, it can be very triggering, it can be very violent, it can maybe not be the right answer for the situation, but if they feel empowered to want to do that, how can we again reduce the harm and support them in their self-agency to report the crime, and also help them understand what will happen and what their support systems are and what's going to help keep them safe. We also want to think about attachment. What are folks' attachment to the people that they might be working with, or someone who might be holding some sort of force, fraud, or coercion around them and their sex work. So it can be very, very hard thing to break the attachment to certain traffickers or pimps or someone who they're trusting, who might be causing more harm to them, that they're willing to break that tie from because they're getting something from them. And it's also been based in a manipulative, process to gain power and control over the person that you're working with. So over time, in a supportive way, we want to break that attachment. And with a caregiver makes a young person more vulnerable to exploitation. Various traumas can cause the break in attachment. Exploiters can use this to create a new attachment with them, right? So we want to implement counseling with people at risk to help them focus on strengthening and rebuilding attachment, to understanding what healthy relationships look like, so that they can see that this bond, this relationship that they have with this person is not matching what a healthy relationship looks like. And if they would like support to help to do that, and that will take time. Okay, so some questions that you might want to ask depending on where you are. It's on our intake. These are sort of questions that we know can help open the window to understanding maybe is this person at risk of trafficking, or are they just engaging in sex work, to help us understand where they're at for themselves. So one, have you ever exchanged sex for money, drugs, or a place to stay, is asked at intake, not only at our agency, but across agencies. Many of you who work in places might already have this question on your intake or ask it at some point. And also, have you had unprotected sex in the last 3 days? What this question does is it allows us to provide access to PEP, which is post-exposure prophylactic, if you're not familiar. It's a pill that someone can take in no longer than 3 days, 72 hours, to greatly reduce the risk of contracting HIV. So if they think that they might have contracted HIV, we can have that window to connect them to PEP and also provide them information about getting onto PrEP, which is the daily pill to reduce your risk of contracting HIV. So what we know, right, so you remember back from when I was reading those quotes from Persist, is that first question, it triggered the worker to say, oh, we need to get this person out of their situation, right? And there was a lot of shame and blame. So the question doesn't stand alone. It comes with where are we at? And we want to provide some information to the person about how we think about sex work, why we're asking the question, and expanding about what that looks like. So first off, just expanding the question to give some examples can often help a young person who wouldn't necessarily maybe define what they're doing as sex work, survival sex, or something that would fit the definition of trafficking. But if we just expand and say, have you ever given a blowjob for a place to stay? Have you ever had sex with someone because you needed a place to stay, or they would give you some money so you could eat that day, or anything like that? They might say like, oh yeah, I guess I did that once like 6 months ago, or whatever. I did it like twice, but I haven't done it again, right? You can get some more information. And it also gives you an opportunity when opening up to a conversation to say like, we support you. This is a judgment-free space. We support sex workers here. We understand that folks might engage in survival sex. It's just to understand what your experiences have been and how we can support you and connect you with any sort of like health resources that you might need, whether that just be condoms or PrEP, or just so you know that this is a safe place that you can talk about what your experiences are while you're out on the stroll or doing other types of sex work. So, well, we spent a lot of time talking about individual safety planning and individual harm reduction, but I also want to take a second to think about organizational safety planning. We know at our drop-in center, a 24/7 drop-in center for LGBTQ homeless youth located on 125th and St. Nicholas in Harlem. All of our other housing sites are confidential. This is the one site that is not, because we need young people to be able to show up at any time and know that this is a place for them to come and engage, be the first point of contact with our services. And so there have been people who hang out outside the space, obviously like overtly and covertly, trying to recruit folks. As we know, our young people are some of the most vulnerable. And so thinking about the policies that we need to have to reduce some of that. So one, we don't allow our young people to hang out outside of the, like on the sidewalk right out front, to help reduce, you know, a congregation of folks and reduce the amount of folks who might be wanting to recruit our young people from knowing that space. Like spoken about before, we want to consider police involvement as not necessarily the safest option for the person. And so thinking about how you all can keep each other safe is going to be really, really important, and what policies and procedures you can put into place and the conversations you can have with the young people about keeping each other safe, right? So it's like, we don't want to have to engage the police because we know that the police can escalate the situation. So this is why we have these rules, right? So helping them understand the thought process and the longer thing of, I mean, like, they're always, you know, no one wants to be told not to hang out from the space when it's convenient. But if you help them understand why the rule exists and that you don't want to engage them in anything that might cause more harm, it can help. Taken from site down there, so whose security is it anyway? It's a toolkit to address institutional violence in nonprofits. Young people in group home, drop-in centers, shelters, recreational facilities are finding highly securitized spaces that are quick to punish and expel them. As organizational leaders and workers, we must understand the impact and roots of institutional violence before we can fully acknowledge the ways our programs knowingly and unknowingly, passively and actively deny help, and on some occasions forcefully push young people closer to engagement with law enforcement. Keeping that centered, and when we're creating policies on how to support our young people, and having our young people be part of those conversations, right? They're the ones who are the most, who know their experience. So it's really, really important to have youth voices at the table thinking about how to create these policies that are going to keep them safe. When we really think about for us, by us, or we keep us safe, it is making sure that the people who we're trying to keep safe are able to say, this is what it looks like to keep us safe. And they can even be active participants in what that looks like. Giving them roles, giving them agency, giving them experience to help be de-escalators in those situations. Okay, so I just talked a lot. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And we can take a look at the chat, see what's popped up. Someone said, one of the most difficult things I've dealt with when serving minors is when they engage in trafficking, but do not want to be helped. I don't know what to do about those situations. It is extremely, extremely hard and difficult when you have a young person who fits the definition of trafficking, that they're engaging, that there's force, fraud, or coercion involved in their experience. You know, I've done a lot of trainings in conjunction with ACS on this issue, and generally the consensus around that is that as mandated reporters, right, we need to make those reports to let us know what that this is happening, while also simultaneously supporting the young person and knowing that why this is happening. You know, we're not providing shame or blame, that we're providing those resources to keep them as safe as possible, so that they keep coming back, right? Like, your bond with them as a non-judgmental service provider is so, so important. And it can, what we do know is that by just getting the criminal justice system involved, by getting juvenile justice involved, it's not always the answer, right? It's about that attachment that is so key. So if we can tap into understanding where the break in attachment was when they're caregiver, and then how that attachment was reformed in this unhealthy and power struggled way with whoever is trafficking them, providing them with the other resources, like that is the long work to help actually get someone out, a minor out of trafficking, while also holding the fact that emotionally it is incredibly difficult and goes against probably everything that we want to do, right? When we see a young person engaging in things that are unsafe and risky, having to hold that as well. I really do get that. How has COVID impact safety plans for your clients? Also, when you talk about access to PPE, dental dams, nutrition, yes. So COVID impacted safety plans with our clients in the way that our 24/7 drop-in shelter did close for most of last year. It is open now for like an overnight drop-in bed. So if anyone who just like needs a bed for the night can do that, and they can access their case manager and the medical and therapy and all of that. They just can't hang out there during the day still. Our housing program has stayed open. So access to phones, access to telehealth, webcam stuff for folks who were not living in our program, but were living in other places or on the street, did make it more difficult, right? To have access to young people. Often it would end up being, when we would engage, it ends up just being like sort of a verbal safety plan based off of the constraints of not being able to do a paper version, but still able to be collaborative, and still able to have those moments to talk through what's going on. When you are engaging in this, what do you feel like you need to de-escalate yourself to feel yourself safe? Like, let's have them name it verbally and talk it through. It's better than none. And then yes, tons of resources for PPE, for dental dams, condoms. Their dental dams, condoms, finger cots, everything is always around and is free access. Signage is also really, really important. To say, have signage around that's saying like, this is how you use different safer sex items. This is, you know, we promote sex, you know, we say sex work is work here, all of those types of things. And then we have we'll connect them. We have a medical facility on the site, which is a partnership with the Institute for Family Health. So some doctors will come to our facility, and then they also have, our young people can go to the different offices. So connecting them with medical providers that you've screened to say like, we need to make sure that you are going to provide a harm reduction and affirming and non-judgmental space for our young people who are queer, who are engaging in sex work. And so having those ongoing and strong relationships with the providers, that whether they come to you or you are referring out to, that they match the values that you are having within your own space is so key. And so we can have those. So we'll give regular HIV exam tests on site. And then for any other larger STI exams, they can do that with the doctors. It's hard because a lot of anti-violence agencies are chasing harm agency funding and implementing practices that don't honor survivor voice and aren't harm reduction focused in order to appease anti-sex work, anti-porn stakeholders and show how tough on trafficking they are. It is very hard. There is, we used to have funding from the Office of Victims of Crime, the federal, I think we still have some, and they thankfully were very understanding of the realities, but it goes with having lots of conversations around what's happening with your young people, like sharing their stories. We expanded sort of the Office of Victims of Crime grant was, obviously specifically targeted toward trafficking and people at risk of trafficking, but we can expand that, right, to say, we're going to use this to also say, and we support, we understand survival sex, we understand sex work. We also know that folks engaging in that, even if we understand it as a valid choice for their circumstance, it does put them at a higher risk for trafficking, right? So how can you expand what the definition is to say, like, we're going to support this while also simultaneously helping reduce harm and risk to reduce the risk of trafficking. So we're still on board with no trafficking. No one wants that. But how can we support young people or all people of all ages to be able to understand the realities that it's not linear and it's not going to happen overnight. Framework is so helpful, and I feel like we should use a similar lens with all kinds of situations in which harm is happening. It's so important to understand that the investment in the current situation is what barriers to safety actually are and what would actually help, not just what we as service providers think we should help or create safety. Yes, thank you for that. Awesome. We have a little bit more time if there's any other more questions. Any thoughts, anything that anyone's doing in their work that's been really successful, right? That we can learn from each other.
I just wanted to pop in to see, sorry, if you could sort of give one piece of advice or one key takeaway, and I know there's a ton of really, really helpful information throughout all of this, but for folks who maybe are not even in necessarily direct human services, like maybe they're working something where they are serving others or they are supporting students, but maybe in a different capacity, whether it be academic advising or someone who works in Title IX or residence life, what is the biggest takeaway that you would like them to carry with them when interacting with students, and understanding that there may be students on our campuses and in our communities who may fall into this, any one of these categories?
Yeah.
Leave that open.
Thank you. Yeah. One I'd say is becoming more aware was just sort of the language, maybe ways in which folks talk about their experiences. So understanding language like, oh, I'm going to the stroll, right? Or I've been hanging out on the piers. I don't really know what I'm going to do about, I don't have any money for X, Y, and Z. I haven't eaten, right? So like hearing those warning signs that are going to tell you about risk and or culture to help start the conversation, right? It's like, oh, like, what have you been doing to, find food, to find access to food, or, what's going on at home? Start to just have the conversation to build the rapport and the trust to help you understand a full picture of what's going on. And then I also really say, put up visuals. Like if you have a space where young people are coming, even if it's a virtual space, right? So how could you have like maybe some signage behind you, just to show like, hey, I'm a queer LGBTQ ally, like trans rights, that I'm saying housing is a human right, sex work is work, you know, having a basket of condoms and dental dams and other things are like in your office, to help spark that, just to let them know like, okay, you're a person who is on my wavelength. This person's probably not going to give me any shame or judgment around if I decide to tell them this, I need help one day, or I just want to talk about what's going on, not even just help. That's also a really important point, is that just because someone's talking to you about their experience doesn't mean that they're wanting you to problem solve it with them or get them out of it, right? Just being that ear and listening and providing that affirming voice around their experience is great. And then one day, if they ever need any sort of support, they know, because they've seen those visuals, you've had those sort of like curious conversations of just understanding their experience, and just opening up that community, because it can feel really isolating sometimes. Yeah.
We're getting some feedback in the comments, just thanking you for your advice there. To sort of piggyback onto your expertise one more time, what are some resources for folks that they could use to become better informed, or to, you know, have a stronger understanding? Because I think everyone at this conference is eager to be a support, but maybe they're not sure exactly where to start in their research or next steps. So what would you advise?
Yeah, the Anti-Violence Project does a lot of really great work in supporting LGBTQ folks around sex work, survival sex, and trafficking. Safe Horizon also has their trafficking program has some good language around that, and it's affirming and supportive. What else? Decriminalize sex work, like Decrim NY, is a great place to look at what the policy work is going on, and connect to other folks, sex worker-led programs. The Red Umbrella Project doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, thinking about those are great places to start. Folks, I see maybe someone asked on the chat. Swap in Brooklyn, great, thank you.
And if folks do have questions, they can also send them directly to me or to Joe or to anyone else from the Arrive team. We can anonymize them, or they can put them in the chat, or feel free to use the raise hand function, and we'll be happy to unmute you.
Yeah, I see a great point here that we've learned on my campus, some students do not recognize what they're doing as survival sex. Totally. The language I've heard is that they got, quote, played, and the student is at risk for many other concerns. Yeah, a lot of people probably won't say what they're doing is survival sex, right? Like that's a very, you know, when we think about language access, like that's a term that we use, right? The providers use, that academics use, that but it's not necessarily the word that the person might use. So reflecting back that language and like keeping an ear. The language is going to evolve all the time around how young people speak about their experiences. And so keeping an ear to the ground around that. And if you have young people in your spaces, in your school, in your campus, in your program, in your community centers, who you know are engaging in some sort of survival sex or are connected to that community in some way, right? Having their voices at the table, helping them provide support to you and compensate them for that work. Is there a peer-led group that they could run, right? Is there things that you can provide that support and access where the folks most close to the community are leading that and helping you understand what safety looks like for them?
We can leave this open to see if any more questions trickle in over the next few minutes. But if not, then we do hope to see everyone back here at 3 o'clock, where we will be hearing from folks from Forge to learn about trans survivors with disabilities. But we'll definitely leave the session open if folks want to hang out and ask some additional questions, send a direct message. Thank you so much, Nadia. This was a session I was really excited about, and you know, what rich content that we were able to provide to folks. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your thoughtful comments and questions. I appreciate it. And yes, I'm not running away. So if anyone has anything else. Someone asked what the pro decriminalization group is. It's literally just called Decrim NY, Decrim New York.
It seems as though most of the attendees appreciated your session as much as we did, and it's always just so important to be able to highlight the voices of providers in our communities, and you know, the work that you all do is just so important. And yeah, just overwhelmingly positive in the chat right now. So thank you so much.
Sure, I appreciate it. It sounds like folks are really engaged in this work. And however they're connected to SUNY and are doing really awesome stuff too. So yeah, the names, someone asked the names of the resources again. So I was saying Anti-Violence Project, I said Safe Horizon, I said Decrim New York, SWAT Brooklyn was a suggestion from someone else. It was a nice reminder, thank you. Different places. I didn't mention, they're next to very New York City based, but Callan Lord Community Health Center provides free, it's a federally qualified health center, so it's, you know, free to anyone, but folks who are engaged in sex work or survival sex can sort of jump the line in therapy wait list and can get access to additional funding for any sort of medical needs that they have. So if you have anyone based in around New York City or in the New York City area, that is a great resource. I might be their therapist if they can come. Yeah.
There's another really great question that popped up in the chat. If service providers have made mistakes in the past and caused harm, how do you suggest beginning repair?
That's a great question, Karen. Thank you. I think it's never too late to repair. And I think it's really awesome, especially with young people, that we model how to do that. And something I would say is if I accidentally caused harm, you know, maybe I didn't know what I said wasn't the right thing to say, right? It was well-intentioned, but the impact was not good. And coming to them with that and saying, hey, I've learned now, you know, since I last spoke to you that, you know, I shouldn't, the X, Y, and Z is true about survival sex and sex work. And I remember like last week I said blank to you, and I really want to apologize for that. I know now that what I said was not the right way to do that. And I want to just let you know that I fully support what you're doing. And I understand, you know, lots of reasons why you're engaging in sex work or survival sex. And I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and then I hope that you can trust me, and again in the future with whatever's going on with you. Yeah, just letting them know that like you got some education, right? That this is, it might be new to you, and that you're going back, and so that the humility of that can help build the connection. Yeah. There's always a chance they might still be like, I'm done, but I think that's the best way to try and build that repair. Thanks to everyone who's putting all those resources in the chat for me. I appreciate
that. And there is one question about whether or not you're able to share your slides, which, you know, we understand sometimes there are limitations, but if they are able to be shared, we'll be we'll collect them from speakers and distribute them to attendees afterwards. So no pressure.
No problem. I have no problem sending like a PDF of them to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And never apologize for eating lunch, whoever said that.
Right. Well, we do have a half an hour break in between. This meeting will stay open. You are welcome to join us for as long as you would like to, but you've been so gracious with your time. So thank you. And we will see everyone at 3 o'clock.
Awesome. Bye. Thank you.